Rick Esther Bienstock is one of Canada's most accomplished investigative documentarians and the award-winning filmmaker behind Speechless. Ian Williams is a writer, poet, and English professor at the University of Toronto. As the 2024 Massey Lecturer, he's helping shape how we talk about race, literature, and to one another. Beatrice Wayne has lectured and taught at the University of Sydney, New York University, and at Harvard, where she taught student activism. She is currently at the Samara Centre for Democracy in Toronto. And Patrice Brodeur is an expert on interreligious dialogue, as well as an assistant professor of religious studies at the Université de Montréal. Hi, everyone. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. Let's get right into it, Rick. 10 years of working on this documentary. At the end of the decade of work, is there a big question you're left with?
That's a big question that you just asked. But the big question now, while the world is on fire and everything is so polarized and so many things are going wrong politically and socially, how do we bring the next generation of I say students because I focused on campus, to be able to communicate with each other, to not look for reasons to be offended to the point where it inhibits their ability to talk about things, particularly things that are uncomfortable. And I think that it behooves us to take a look and try and make students feel safer in their environment to have those conversations without fear of social ostracization or without fear of social death, without fear of alienating friends, because it's really only by conversation that we're able to resolve issues, to learn new things about each other. I really felt on campus that there is a real self-censorship going on. It's not good for the students. It's not good for society.
And so for the three of you who've worked on campuses in the United States or here in Canada, does that resonate for you, what Rick is just saying there, Beatrice?
I think the importance of students having space for civic dialogue and talking across difference is incredibly important. And I think it's important we create those spaces in our classrooms, but also across the university. But I think a way to do that is through empowering students. I would always start my courses with asking and inviting the students to create their own code of conduct. How did they want to interact with each other? Do they want to have laptops in the classroom? How do they want to interact and exchange in a way where they could feel free to communicate their ideas? And when they create their own code of conduct, when they're empowered in that way, I felt that really inspired robust, interesting, divergent points of view where students felt like they were able to say what they wanted to say, but also ask really interesting questions and feel sure that they were going to be respected and that their professor was supporting their civic dialogue.
I think that starting with this sort of getting to a common place about the code of conduct, or whatever we call it, principles of interaction, is essential. People fear that either what they say is going to hurt somebody, or they don't want to be, ostracized themselves, or they're so angry about a situation or about what they just heard that they prefer to just not to say anything. And so there's a variety of reasons for this silence. But again, if the code is not developed together so that there's common ownership of that code, I think we're missing a huge opportunity to use the classroom, which is a really critical, it's a wonderful environment.
I think the fear is real on college campuses because the consequences of getting it wrong could cost you your social circle, it can cost you your career. Everything lives on the internet forever afterwards. And so I think at universities, we have this opportunity, I like this word, to create an environment where students can make a mistake, where we can decide that a mistake is simply a mistake, it's an error, it's not a sin that will punish you eternally for it. And to decide this kind of spectrum of misbehavior en route to figuring out what your values and principles are. So you don't have to be punished as you're making a mistake, as you're sort of changing your mind and learning issues. Yeah, I think there should be space on campuses for that kind of failure.
Is there space on campuses for that kind of failure?
I'd like to say that, right, obviously it depends. Some classes, from what I understand, my experience, I'm not an academic, right? So I go in and I've just been to many, many different campuses and spoken to so many people off the record, way more people off the record than on the record. And the parameters for offense But this is one example. People are offended by certain things. Words are harmful. It's important to be sensitive to different cultures and different communities and different classes. But if we keep expanding what it means to be offended, and that offense is taken so seriously, then we're really endangering kids' ability to talk to each other. We need to change that culture of you're in this tribe and I'm in that tribe and we don't agree and we hate each other. And if you say this, I'm insulted and I'm going to report you. And that's what I witnessed. And I think, and that's what I kind of tried to cover a little bit in the film.
Coming up, we'll continue our panel conversation with filmmaker Rick Esther Bienstock and Canadian academics. We're talking about how to have dialogues on campus and beyond. The two-part documentary Speechless can be seen on CBC Gem. And if you want to join the conversation, scan this QR code or go to cbc.ca/documentaries/speechless.
People told me these blow-ups were just conservative spin, clickbait, manufactured outrage. And sure, right-wing media feasts on this stuff. They love it. But what I saw wasn't a few isolated incidents. It was a pattern, targeting real people, damaging reputations, destroying careers, ruining lives. And as these stories piled up, you could feel the pressure building, the pendulum picking up speed. Because ideas that start on campus don't stay there. They migrate outward into bureaucracy, politics, and law.
Everyone's coming from their own lived experience, their own backgrounds, their own demographics. How do we decide who gets to draw the line and where we draw the line?
Well, this brings a question up for me, which is who is doing this deciding? Who is in the role of creating structural, systemic changes that support positive civic dialogue? So I think if we're talking about college campuses in Canada, how can our academic institutions, our governments, how can they encourage our academic institutions to really invest in programs that help support really strong skills in civic dialogue? Because I think what we're really talking about are skills. This is training. This is something that a university can do really, really well. It can train young people in the ability to talk across difference, to come to common understanding across difference. It can be schools for democracy. Democracy is people power, people coming together across differences to make collective decisions. And the university should play a really strong role in that.
Yeah, it's a really uncomfortable question because I think it's identifying the problem of power, right? The person with the power is the person who decides who gets offended, whose feelings matter in the room, what words get used, how a political situation is framed, who are the heroes and who are the victims. All of those things get decided, and students can feel it on campus. They can feel this kind of energy moving through the news media, moving through all these sort of online, the social media circuits, and they know what is the right side to be on and the wrong side, the popular side, the expedient side. They know all of those things, and they're trying to do this dance, almost like, picture an action movie where all the, the laser beams come out and you're trying to sort of like, tiptoe your way through this. And it's nearly impossible to win at that, right? It's really impossible to be right. So for me, the thing is not, am I going to say the wrong thing? It's when I say the wrong thing, what happens, right?
Because part of the learning, the most important learning happens precisely when we realize we've made a mistake. We take time to reflect upon it, often with the help of others, supportive others, not so much judgmental others, so that eventually, one can understand exactly where did it come from that I said certain things or in a certain way, and what I need to change.
Let me ask you this, because in Rick's documentary, a number of the academics she profiles started out with, probably like you, good intentions, wanting to do the kinds of things that you do, have people debate, discuss, and yet, as time goes on, they sort of find themselves in a pickle, to put it mildly. And I'm wondering, you've all been in the academic field for some time now, how much time do you spend thinking about these issues?
You can't calculate the number of hours that you spend thinking about how something is going to land, or how to resolve a situation that happened last week. You're constantly like fine-tuning and doing it. Of course, it's worthwhile work, but it's not sustainable to live like that, right? It's not sustainable to be in the classroom like that. I think what might happen, to the professors with good intentions, when you're convinced that you are right, to go back to that sort of binary, and it's a space where your values, you also want to sort of promote certain values, let's say democracy, things that you think should be universal. Can the classroom like be this really like neutral, idealistic space? You're like really invested, Beatrice, in like this nonpartisan idea, right? But I think students sometimes want us to lean or put our fingers on the scale a bit and say, just tell me the direction of like good ethical behavior with compelling reasons, and I can go for that.
So there's certain universities that are now saying no cell phones in classes anymore. Then there's no danger of someone recording someone saying something so it won't go viral. There was that aspect, the social media aspect, the danger of something going viral and ruining someone's life. But the general atmosphere is kind of social justice versus academia. I think that in many, at least in what I witnessed in very many campuses, that was starting to overtake critical the idea of critical inquiry. And I think we do have to be sure that we're not insulting somebody, but what is the criteria? And you said it, power.
I find it astounding and wonderful that there's so much sensitivity and knowledge that comes from a lot of critical thinking, but it's not matched with better EQ and how to express it in ways that could be heard by people with whom you disagree or you think you disagree, and to what extent. And that's where the dialogue comes in. And dialogue is so, so important today because, let's face it, how many of our schools, high schools and universities have debate clubs? Probably all of them. How many of them have dialogue clubs? I've asked the questions when I went around lecturing. Very few. That says a lot about our educational culture. And that's where I believe that there needs to be a bit of a balance here.
I think really investing in a civic education that prioritizes talking across difference, that prioritizes understanding and listening to other people. There's actually this wonderful organization called Democracy Fitness from Denmark, and they approach engaging in democracy as a fitness activity. And part of the activity is learning how to listen. These don't happen organically, naturally. They're something that needs to be taught alongside math, alongside history, alongside science.
Coming up, we'll continue our panel conversation with filmmaker Rick Esther Bienstock and Canadian academics. We're talking about how to have dialogues on campus and beyond. The two-part documentary Speechless can be seen on CBC Gem. And if you want to join the conversation, scan this QR code or go to cbc.ca/documentaries/speechless. For every action, there's an opposite reaction. On campus, a movement for fairness and inclusion slid into zealotry. Supercharged by social media, certain ideas became blasphemy, and disagreements put professors and students in the crosshairs.
It's not a debate!
There's always been protests on campuses. There's always been debate, disagreement, all of those things. One of the most obvious but newer elements is the online space now. Is that where you see the wrinkle in time, the complication?
Yeah, I think the online, COVID didn't help this, right? So the online space has really crept into the real space. So how we treat people online with a sort of casualness and disposability and the ghosting and all of that, those attitudes have sort of come into the real. And I think we can feel this kind of change in the energy of the world where there's a more casual kind of disregard or cruelty, right? There's got to be some kind of education that sort of also involves like media literacy or media training. I think we need to start reading social media the way we read Moby Dick and we read novels and we read poetry. There's a genre emerging that we need to understand how that genre works. and the effects that it's trying to sort of stimulate and produce in us, and either resist, comply, manipulate, all of those things. But there needs a kind of awareness of the forms that we're dealing with every day.
And I think we really haven't grappled with the way that the polluted digital ecosystem that these young students exist in is shaping the way that they engage on issues. We know that very large social media platforms prioritize engagement, and through that boost anger-inducing content. And so students are encouraged towards anyone on a social media platform, but the young people who are on it a lot experience content that boosts their rage, that boosts their feeling of disaffection, and are less likely to have positive civic conversations online. And that's by design. That's by design that they're being exposed to that. So they're really being taught antisocial behavior through their the time that they spend online, which is a real shame because we also know through research that young people get engaged in politics online. They're more likely to engage in politics offline if they start to be civically engaged online. So it's incumbent on us to do something about our digital ecosystem, because right now it is not supporting healthy young people, their mental health or their civic engagement. And we really need a strong design code, a digital media regulation.
You went to many institutions in the United States. What did you observe in terms of institutions doing things to help move this along, to make things better?
I mean, you're all academics. I'm just an observer, in a way. So I don't have the kind of academic expertise. My experience was that there's a lot of ideology and activism on campuses that is shutting down this dialogue. But I feel, and that's why I keep mentioning offense, if you say words are harmful, if people actually believe that pronouncing your last name improperly is harmful, it's harmful, then, and if you're offended by it, then I couldn't say anything if you were offended that I didn't say it right. If I'm walking on eggshells to talk about things that are very basic, and obviously, these kind of dialogues are difficult when it's about difficult things. It's easy to talk about a recipe. It's hard to talk about race. It's hard to talk about gender. It's hard to talk about October 7th. For example, I have a Harvard lecturer who basically says there are two biological sexes, not genders, sexes. And that had her lose her job. I mean, she had to resign. So what she's saying is something that is not such an outlier concept. She wasn't trying to question the trans issue, but she was caught in the crossfire. I only give these examples because if you talk to the individual people, they would believe in discourse, but it's not the way they're behaving on campus. And to change that is a real culture shift, I think.
Do you think people are really interested on college campuses, on university campuses, of having the civil dialogue that you're all saying we need to have?
What I've encountered more recently over the last 2-3 years is really with the breakdown of dialogue after October 7th, 2023, in some circles. We've seen sort of, what happened on many of our university campuses with the outdoor encampments and so on and so forth. And the reactions often on the part of leadership of universities regarding that. And often sort of sending mixed message. On the one hand, yes, promoting freedom of expression. On the other hand, sort of, bringing the police in, etc. But what I think is important is that thanks to an effort that was developed in Montreal called Solidarity Dialogues, that I've been really lucky to be invited to join, that emerged in the 2-3 months following sort of that October 2023. A few faculties sort of in social work, sort of people that are into mediation and conflict resolution sort of got together, bringing sort of their Muslim, Palestinian, Jewish, and mix sort of identities together, and then adding my own sort of mix of identity as a French-Canadian, Québécois de souche, Roman Catholic and all of that. So, and as we do training and develop opportunities for faculty as well as leadership in universities in Montreal, together with students, so intergenerational and interfunctional within the university ecosystem, we've been able to develop sort of like a proper sort of understanding of the challenge of learning how to do dialogue, proper dialogue, deep dialogue. It's not easy.
I think there is a deep appetite for it. The Public Policy Forum had a study of young people across Canada, And they found that the number one issue, the top issue that young people were most concerned about, close with climate change, was polarization. Polarization is a concern for young people.
Ian, what do institutions need to do?
Yeah, I think actually this is going to be the issue that either like evolves universities towards a future that is relevant, or relegates them to irrelevance, right? And so I think we see things like offices of civil engagement and particular people responsible for that on campuses. And meanwhile, like not realize that these are, if you can't have that foundation of being able to talk about things that are really divisive, then the AI, everything rests on the ability to be able to communicate, right? So I think we can be distracted by sort of glossy and sort of fancy things right now. But for me, the future of the university is in its connection to the broader world.
The world is complicated, but I agree. I think institutions have to step up. I'll give you just another quickie example, and I know we're near an end. There was a geophysicist, Dorian Abbott. He taught at University of Chicago, and he wrote an op-ed piece in Newsweek, and it was some criticisms of affirmative action, not of identity-driven. He believes in merit-driven. He was invited to speak at MIT on exoplanets. The talk had nothing to do with affirmative action. And suddenly there was a bunch of students and admin who said, look, we don't agree with this op-ed piece and his talk. It was a very prestigious talk. It was canceled. That was my experience on campuses. I'm not saying it happens everywhere. And I think there's some phenomenal professors and great administrators and also amazing students. But I'm just trying to describe the atmosphere that made me really interested in this topic, because when I read his op-ed, I agreed with it or didn't agree with it, but it wasn't rabid. It wasn't something that I went, oh my God, that is really an unpleasant opinion. It's opinion I might not agree with, but it's within the norm, within the Overton window of what's allowable discussion. That was an institutional decision, and it was hard to see sometimes.
Coming up, we'll continue our panel conversation with filmmaker Rick Esther Bienstock and Canadian academics. We're talking about how to have dialogues on campus and beyond. The two-part documentary Speechless can be seen on CBC Gem. And if you want to join the conversation, scan this QR code or go to cbc.ca/documentaries/speechless.
See you in the shadow.
If I've learned anything going back to school, it's this. If we want to hold on to our fragile democracy, we've got to defend free speech, even when it's hard, especially when it's personal. Because once speech becomes a privilege, granted or revoked by those in power, it isn't free anymore. It's just power. And then it's not just speech we're losing. It's conversation. The ability to speak across differences. That's what's at stake.
We have to wrap up our conversation, but just want to give each one of you a sort of final thought. A lot of this is easier said than done, right? The kind of call to action that you say needs to have is going to take time.
Well, I always say the same thing. I think we just be kind and just have conversations. I mean, just talk, try and be honest and be sincere in what you're doing. I mean, the institutions need to protect students and professors from being canceled. But I think students should just be kind to each other and really try and have deep conversations.
I think we have to maybe start considering what are the things we're willing to lose, right? And what might be taken away from us if we want to sort of live according to our principles. So am I willing to lose the talk? Am I willing to lose the job? And in a more extreme state, are you willing to sort of give up even your life for the things you believe in? I think we're not too far away from having those kinds of thoughts.
I think the need to have a deep investment that can support young people engaging in improving their communities, feeling like active citizens, feeling like they can come together with people from different backgrounds to make positive change in Canada is extremely important. And I will leave it on that, a Canadian Democracy Endowment.
That's good.
It's a long-term investment. And the leadership of our institutions is key. But let's face it, I like to look at leadership all the way up from the top political leadership or of any major institution, transnational, et cetera, whether it's business or politics or any religious, other, well, you name it, that leadership all the way down to the individual, our students, our parents, et cetera. And what kind of leadership am I responsible for to influence my circle of influence? Where am I learning that so that I can practice the leadership with the civics, democratic practices, and so on and so forth? And when we define leadership in that way, we can define it in a more inclusive way. We actually pull ourselves away from whatever small amounts of power we might have when we think that way. And so part of the change in thinking on the nature of leadership needs to happen also on our campuses in particular, but more broadly speaking. And that leadership, I think, is reflected, if I may say so, by CBC choosing to invest in this particular kind of documentary, choosing to have this kind of panel, so that this panel is not just deconstructing the problem, but it's also presenting and offering different solutions and options and other alternatives to this problem, this mega problem. And that's leadership.
Well, I will say that I do commend CBC for that, because also all of the issues that I tackled, which are, like I said, if you're talking about free speech, it's always uncomfortable issues, are things that are actually happening, and people find it very hard to talk about. And I feel very privileged that, and also I have a certain identity, right? There's so much about identity. I have a certain identity that isn't necessarily conducive to talking about I mean, yes, October 7th, but, you know, race and gender, and the fact that I had this opportunity, but just to take you inside what's happening, because I think higher ed is really important. I think civil discourse is important, and I really believe in democracy, but hopefully it will elicit discussion and conversation, even if it pisses people off, if they're talking about it and grappling with the ideas. That's the only thing we can do.
Thank you for a very robust conversation. Really important to be talking about these things. Appreciate all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pia.